registered, people who aren't able to make it, but they will certainly get this recording. And so I'm glad and thankful to those of you who may be listening to this post facto with the recording. You'll get my email address at the end of this session if you want to drop us an email to follow up if you're, again, listening to this after the fact. But those of you who are here with us, make sure you find that chat. Seems like most of you already have, so that you can drop any questions in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that as we work through, as Steve talks through some things. So, but I am so honored, and I know Steve may think that's a weird word, but I mean it, Steve. I'm honored that you would do this. Steve and I go way back. I was good friends with the previous chief reader. Worked closely with David and met Steve. And at the time, I was telling Steve, I was like, man, Steve, you need to move off of lit because I can't make you chief reader, because at the time we couldn't have consecutive chief readers from the same university. But I'm glad they said, nope, we want Steve, because I know you know the program. I know you know the test. I know you care a lot about the test and about the students and the teachers. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Steve, and let you talk a little bit about who you are, how you got where you are, and what your role is at the reading.
Okay. Yeah, Brandon, I'm glad to be here, and certainly glad to see you again as well. So now I think it's a great question. I was reflecting on, I've been with AP for about 25 years now, and kind of the short version of it is right after I finished graduate school, I was the summer before I started my first tenure track job, I wrote to the chair and I asked him if I could teach summer school. And he said, no, they're all filled up. I think he was probably fishing for some suggestion to me, but he said, you should try AP literature. And I'll be honest, I never had AP lit in my high school and I had no experience with it. But I applied and became a reader. And that was back in Daytona Beach. And I enjoyed it. And I could tell right away how much it impacted my teaching, and just seeing student writing in different ways, and meeting a lot of teachers who were really passionate about their classes in English, literature, and writing, both at the high school and secondary level and college level. And so, like a lot of people, that's how I got started. And I did that for my 5 years. I got bumped up to table leader, thankfully. And honestly, I just started, I kind of lucked into meeting a few people along the way. Jim Barkus was one of the chief readers, former chief readers, who knew David and was, exactly. Talk about somebody who really kind of transformed my way of thinking about education as well. And so passionate about both AP and his own classroom. And I became a table leader. And honestly, if I had stayed a table leader, I would have been thrilled. I'd still be doing it. Like, I loved doing that. I loved the balance of reading and working with others, collaboration, and all those things. AP has been wonderful about offering me additional opportunities. I'm pretty, ask me 6 months ahead of time to do something, I'm likely to say yes. So I just kept saying yes to different opportunities, and kept doing different things, whether it was question leader or exam leader there for a few times. And so back around, I don't know, it was in Salt Lake City around 2017, 2018. I thought I would sort of sail off into the sunset when David retired, when he rotated out. And like you said, they changed the rule. I had really no really designs on being chief reader. I literally really thought I'm happy. I've enjoyed my career, and I'll wrap it up. But then they invited me to apply, and it worked. And so here I am.
Yeah, and I think that's just wonderful. And it only makes sense to keep that institutional memory working through the system. So I think it's great. And oh no, Steve, Susan's here, so we should probably just like wrap it up. Yeah. So we're not going to say, so we don't say anything bad about Susan. I'm just kidding. Susan Barber, so good to see you here, and so good to see lots of friends of the program. I saw so many people talking about this summer traveling from the reading and going and doing other things. One person road tripped to Kentucky from Salt Lake City. Hey, I'm kind of partial to Kentucky, so I think it's a great place to road trip. And so it's great to see everybody here again. So Steve, one of the things that we hear a lot about this summer especially is the digital exam. And so I'd love to know what your thoughts are about the digital exam, and what you were seeing from the digital pilot versus the handwritten, and kind of why this has been. Some people think I'm going to say rushed, but I don't mean rushed in a bad way. It's been hurried along. So
Yeah.
can you give a little bit more on that, please?
Yeah, let me give some initial thoughts and then ask some follow-up questions, or if anybody else has questions, I'm happy to give my 2 cents and share what I know. And I'll just start by saying I think we're in a really good spot with AP literature, where I would argue it's not been rushed, right? It's been in the works for, quite a while. Um, Even before I settled into this, I know that it had been some plans had been in place to begin implementing this, right? So we've been ahead of the curve. AP Literature has been one of the pilots for the digital exams for multiple years. So we've had the luxury of doing it in a smaller scale. About 4 years ago, I think, was when we first started. And we're able to get some really good feedback on what was working, what wasn't working, what teachers were concerned about. And being behind the scenes a little bit, I'm confident that College Board and ETS both have been listening to teachers, and especially in AP literature, and trying to adjust things and iron out some of those wrinkles that people were seeing. So um, in terms of AP literature, we're in good shape. Like I said, we've had some a few years to pilot these sort of things. Um, some of our early concerns were just with, I think, at the testing level, right? Some of the clunkiness in the classrooms, Wi-Fi problems. One of my big concerns always is access, and I know that's been a common concern with teachers. I know College Board has built up some programs for either delivering Wi-Fi to schools, offering devices, things like that. The feedback we're getting is that it's going pretty smoothly, so that's encouraging, and that students are liking it as well. Um, it gives us loads of flexibility at the reading, so I really do appreciate that. It allows us to have readers at home. When we get into the digital scoring and things like that, it just makes it more efficient. I'm always happy at the reading when we can get readers trained on one form. When we have needs in other forms, we can move them to other areas. And so they're getting training and experience with different forms. And I think that's more they can take back to their classes. So that's some of the initial thoughts. What else are you wondering about? Or what do you think people would want to hear about?
Well, I know too that, and feel free. I mean, I know this from what they've told consultants and conversations with you all, because I'm not at that level of no anymore, and I'm fine with that. The that the one of the reasons we moved it from 2029 to 2025 was the significant performance difference between students who were doing the pilot and
Mm,
typing it and students who were writing it. Like the kids who were typing were doing so much better in many ways that it
mm.
almost felt, my word, unethical to not make the change sooner than later.
Uh,
Can you speak to that? Because I know they expanded the pilot this year.
Yeah. My understanding is that the forms are performing fairly equally. And so,
Okay, good.
um, yeah, I kind of had the opposite concern. Like I guess because all of us, I was familiar with the handwritten. I was a concern maybe shifting to the digital was going to, were we evaluating knowledge of literature, or were we evaluating typing skills, keyboarding skills, or something along those lines?
Yeah.
Um, where readers going to score it more harshly was one of my concerns, just because sometimes the digital looks so much shorter. And so how are we going to respond? So I wanted to make sure students were getting a fair assessment and a fair scoring. And none of that really seems to be coming to fruition. Thankfully, we do have these statisticians who can explore the numbers and look for anomalies, look for patterns that don't seem indicative of other scoring factors, and they can be on alert to those sort of things. And even with the use of equator questions and things like that, where we can
Yeah.
predict how the equivalent group of students should perform, they seem to be doing that in digital and now the old-fashioned hard copies.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, teachers are coming to me and to other consultants, and this concern about how they're going to have to change their teaching, and that's
Mm,
totally justified. I'm not going to be dismissive of that. Like, we're
yeah,
used
yeah,
to asking students to annotate or to mark as they read, pen and paper. But I do try to, and again, I don't want to be dismissive of that, but I do try to
yeah.
reaffirm with teachers that, this is not, none of this is new to the kids. Like
Right.
they have been doing this, most of them since kindergarten. And so interacting, reading on a screen, writing on a screen is great. And you guys will see, I just put the links to Blue Book in the chat so everyone can download the Blue Book app from the College Board website. With the
Yeah.
Blue Book app, you and your students will get one free practice exam in Blue Book. But you'll notice in the Blue Book app, kids can annotate, kids can make comments, everything in those texts, just like they can if they're handwritten. And then students can also, and here's a real game changer, they can copy and paste from the text into their own essays so they don't have to spend that time writing. Now, I worry about that we're going to end up with huge chunks of copy, huge chunks of quotes. There are worse things to worry about here, but I think the old saying, the kids will be all right. I think they will be fine. We are going to have to adjust our pedagogy though, and College Board is working with AP Central to make changes to AP Central so that it looks just like Blue Book. And I know Perfection Learning, my publisher who's sponsoring this, is doing the same. I know Bedford is doing the same. And so pretty soon students should have surrounding them this infrastructure that looks just like that digital exam. I don't know if you have
I
anything
was
to add to
talking.
that, Steve, but I'm just kind of sharing what I
Yeah,
know.
no, I don't want to be dismissive either, because we want our students to do as well as they can. We want to teach as well as we can. So I think they're legitimate concerns anytime a big change like that happens. I was talking to some teachers last week at APAC in Las Vegas, and I thought their suggestions were reassuring to me, and it really sticks in my head. Their suggestions were, let your students try it and observe. Like in some ways, we don't have to change anything about our teaching. The course hasn't changed in the sense of commentary, evidence, outcomes, learning objectives, all those sort of things. Same course. And so everything we've taught before is still relevant and useful. In terms of the taking of the exam itself, the suggestion was a simple one. Open it up, let your students do that like practice exam, and see how they do and see what their troubles are. Their point was, when they did that with their students, they discovered, like you're saying, they're really savvy with it. They understand the reading from screens more than we do. Those annotating tools, they dive into those, and there's really some pretty robust annotation tools now available that they're used to using. And these teachers even said, like, students seem more engaged and even more comfortable with it. So, that doesn't mean that they won't have glitches, but I think, let's face it, I know my students teach me plenty when it comes to technology and negotiating some of these things. At the least, they can then tell you, here's where we're having some troubles. Here's where we're not sure how to translate what we've done on paper into the digital world. But they've got a pretty good jump start on it. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah,